The great question. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you do, how you speak, who you trust, what you chase, what you fear, has been orchestrated not by logic, not by conscious intention, but by something you've never dared to look at directly. Not a demon, not a government conspiracy, not a flaw in your intelligence, but something older, quieter, infinitely more intimate. A wound. Not a bleeding, obvious wound, but a hidden one. The kind that's so deeply buried, you've built your entire identity around, pretending it's not there. At first glance, everything in your life appears stable. You show up on time. You smile when expected. You say you're fine because you believe you are. Yet underneath, something strange keeps happening. You sabotage the very relationships you crave. You chase goals only to feel hollow when you reach them. You feel drained in rooms full of people, yet terrified of being alone. And if someone ever asks, "What's wrong?" you don't have an answer. Because by now, the wound has become the default. You no longer feel the sharp sting of the knife. You feel only the echo it left behind. Now imagine this. Every time you avoid a difficult conversation, say yes when you mean no, smile when you're aching inside, or cling to someone who keeps leaving, you're obeying the wound. You're not free. You're following the blueprint it etched into your nervous system years ago. You think you're making choices, but you're only performing compulsions dressed up as logic. So the question isn't, are you wounded? The question is, how many of your beliefs, habits, and decisions are actually survival strategies crafted to defend the wound's existence? What if the person you've become is not a natural evolution of self, but a carefully constructed mask designed to keep the original pain out of sight? What if confidence, kindness, ambition, even strength, can be just as much a defense mechanism as fear, withdrawal, or anger? But here's the most unsettling part. These wounds don't need your permission to steer your life. They don't even need your awareness. In fact, they thrive best in the dark. That one harsh sentence your father said to you when you were 7, the day your best friend betrayed you, the moment someone violated your trust and taught you silence was safer than speaking. You think you've moved on. After all, it was years ago, but the wound doesn't measure time the way your conscious mind does. To the subconscious, it's still happening. That moment is a frozen glacier buried under your personality, reshaping every decision you make on the surface. And the more you pretend it's healed, the tighter its grip becomes. Is it any wonder that you feel anxiety with no clear source? That intimacy feels dangerous even with people you love? That no matter how much you achieve, it never feels like enough? Maybe the problem isn't your mindset. Maybe it's not your lack of discipline or motivation. Maybe it's not that you're broken. Maybe you've simply never met the part of you that was hurt and never got to speak. Maybe the child who cried alone in the dark is still pacing silently in the back of your mind, tugging on your sleeve every time you pretend you're over it. The wound doesn't want attention, it wants acknowledgement. It wants to be seen, not as weakness, not as failure, but as truth. What if the fear you feel when you're about to speak your mind isn't irrational, it's ancestral? What if your impulse to overachieve is rooted in a terror of abandonment that began when someone you loved withheld affection as punishment? What if the way you push people away when they get too close is not because you don't want love, but because the wound is convinced love always ends in pain? These aren't abstract theories. They're emotional programs that run silently in the background of your life. Until you trace them to their origin, they'll keep shaping your future to match your unprocessed past. So here is the great paradox. The more you try to appear healed, the more the wound controls you. The more you avoid it, the more it manipulates you. And the longer you keep pretending, the more you confuse the pain for your personality. But what would happen if, instead of numbing it, hiding it, rationalizing it, you turned around and faced it? Not with shame, not with blame, but with the quiet, terrifying courage to simply ask, where did I start pretending this didn't hurt? Because somewhere in that question lies the beginning of freedom. Somewhere in the stillness, in the raw silence where the wound trembles without makeup, is the first real step toward healing. Not the kind of healing that polishes your image, but the kind that rewrites your story from the inside out. You cannot kill what you refuse to name, and you cannot reclaim your life until you stop giving it away to wounds you won't admit exist. The hidden problem. its psychological, philosophical roots? You think you've moved on. You convince yourself that what happened didn't really matter, that you were too young to remember, too strong to be affected, too rational to be haunted. But trauma does not obey logic. It isn't stored in the narrative centers of the brain, where you can access it like a book on a shelf and reframe it with adult understanding. No. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in those quiet reflexes and micro-expressions you don't even notice you carry. It shapes how you breathe when someone raises their voice, how you flinch when someone gets too close, how your stomach knots when you feel joy, because somewhere deep inside, joy has been wired to danger. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And that is the silent tyranny of ignored wounds. You don't just carry them. They carry you. They choose your lovers. They shape your fears. They whisper scripts into your mind and masquerade as instinct, as personality, as destiny. What you think is just how you are may actually be a defense mechanism calcified into your identity. To understand the roots of this hidden problem, we must first accept a brutal truth. The human mind is a master of concealment. It buries pain not to deceive you, but to protect you. From overload, from collapse, from the unbearable recognition that the world was once unsafe, and worse, that the people who were supposed to love you might have failed you. So it builds a mask, one that smiles, achieves, maybe even thrives. But underneath, the original wound festers in silence. It may have started as a single moment, a slap, a scream, a betrayal. Or maybe it was chronic, a slow erosion of your spirit by 1,000 unmet needs. Either way, it leaves a mark. And if the wound was created in childhood, when your nervous system was still writing its first definitions of love, safety, and self-worth, then its fingerprints are on everything. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that suffering is the default condition of life, and that our efforts to escape it often deepen it. He wasn't wrong. When you pretend your wound doesn't exist, you don't erase it, you merely split from it. You exile a part of yourself into the shadows of the psyche. And what lives in shadow always finds a way to leak out, through sabotage, addiction, projection, or apathy. This is what Jung called the shadow self, the hidden repository of all we repress, deny, and disown. And yet most people don't realize this, because society rewards those who perform well, not those who heal deeply. It teaches us to override pain with productivity, to shame vulnerability as weakness, to seek validation instead of integration. We've created a culture where dissociation is normalized, where numbness is sold as strength, where emotional suppression is mistaken for maturity. And in that environment, the wounded learn to armor up, to adapt, to pretend. But the price of pretending is steep. You lose touch with your authentic self. You forget what you truly want because your every desire is filtered through fear. You enter relationships not as a whole person, but as a composite of coping strategies. You love through walls. You communicate through silence. You bond through wounds, not through wholeness. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility, because unless you bring these unconscious patterns to light, they will continue to script your life. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust and the father of logotherapy, taught that between stimulus and response lies a space, and in that space lies our power to choose. But what if your wound controls that space? What if the stimuli that trigger you, rejection, abandonment, authority, intimacy, are hijacking your choices without your knowledge? Then you are not truly free. You are reactive, not responsive, driven, not deliberate. Sartre said that we are condemned to be free, that we must bear the burden of our choices. But how can you bear that burden if you don't know who is choosing for you? Consider this. Every wound creates a belief. A child abandoned may grow up believing they are unworthy of love. A child criticized may become addicted to achievement. A child unseen may become a performer, always seeking attention. And these beliefs are sticky. They embed themselves into your mental operating system, quietly distorting how you see yourself, others, and the world. You're not chasing success. You're avoiding failure. You're not being kind. You're avoiding conflict. You're not in love. You're trauma-bonded. And so the cycle continues. The wound is invisible, but its effects are everywhere. Even your virtues may be veiled wounds in disguise. Are you loyal or afraid of being alone? Are you generous or terrified of being disliked? Are you independent or simply convinced that no one will ever really be there for you? The philosopher Alan Watts once warned that trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The self that tries to heal cannot be the same self that has been shaped by the wound. Something deeper must emerge. But for that to happen, the mask must crack, the truth must be faced, the pain must be named. And this is where things begin to shift, not through more achievements, but through courageous honesty, through the slow, patient process of re-owning your shadow, of feeling what you have avoided, of grieving what was lost, of forgiving what was done, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. The roots of your wounds may go deep. They may be ancestral, collective, or existential. But the first step is always the same: to admit they exist. Not in shame, but in dignity. Not as a victim, but as a witness. And when you do that, when you stop running and start listening, you begin to reclaim the power that was never truly lost, only forgotten. The unseen consequences. You live, you function, you might even thrive on the outside, but the wounds you pretend don't exist continue to echo inside, shaping the architecture of your life in invisible but undeniable ways. They don't shout, they whisper. They don't show up wearing trauma labels or dramatic outbursts. Instead, they appear as subtle patterns, misaligned choices, and chronic emptiness that no achievement, relationship, or distraction can seem to fill. Imagine this. A man builds a successful career, becomes respected in his field, admired for his discipline and intellect. But when he's alone, the silence is unbearable. Not because he's lonely in the literal sense, but because his childhood wound, growing up with an emotionally unavailable parent, taught him that love must be ear-ned through performance. So every accomplishment is laced with desperation. Every failure, however minor, triggers a cascade of shame. He doesn't know this. He just calls it ambition, or worse, just the way I am. And this is the tragedy. When you're wounded and unaware, your life becomes a performance scripted by fear and defended by rationalization. You don't see the bars because the cage is made of beliefs. Or take the woman who never asks for help. She prides herself on independence, on being low maintenance. She avoids conflict like it's a plague. She's always the giver, the caretaker, the fixer. But underneath that armor is a core wound of rejection, perhaps rooted in a childhood where vulnerability was punished or where love came only when she was good. Now, even as an adult, the idea of expressing need feels like weakness. She doesn't say what she really wants. She accepts less than she deserves. She avoids attachment not because she's cold, but because she's afraid. And this pattern, unnoticed and unchallenged, becomes the quiet thief of her joy. This is how wounds work. They don't just hurt you once. They continue hurting you in disguise. They trick you into believing the problem is always external. You think your partner is too distant. Your friends don't care enough. Your job isn't fulfilling. And sometimes that's true. But often, the dissatisfaction is deeper. It's not about what's happening around you, but what's happening inside you. A deep ache for connection that you don't know how to ask for. A need for safety that you keep outsourcing to unreliable people. A craving for validation that no amount of praise can satisfy. Because when your wound writes your narrative, nothing ever feels like enough. You either overreach or withdraw. You either cling or push away. And you wonder why relationships feel like war zones, or why joy feels fleeting, or why peace is always conditional. Even the mind becomes a battlefield. You overthink, you ruminate, you replay conversations in your head long after they've ended. You scan for danger even in calm moments. That email you sent, was it too much? That text you didn't get a reply to, are they angry? That moment of silence, did you do something wrong? You don't recognize that these thoughts aren't logic, they're alarms. Your nervous system is still living in a past where hypervigilance kept you safe. So now, even in safe environments, your body doesn't relax, and over time, this chronic tension becomes part of your identity. You say you have anxiety, that you're introverted, that you're just wired differently. Maybe. Or maybe your wound just hasn't been heard yet. And then there's the body, the one place where your wounds always leave fingerprints, chronic tension in your shoulders, stomach issues that no doctor can quite explain, insomnia that no sleeping pill truly fixes. You call it stress. But what if stress is the language your body uses to speak what your mouth won't? What if your symptoms are stories your soul is desperate to tell? Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, explains how trauma reshapes the very structure of the brain and body. It doesn't just live in memories, it lives in reactions, in muscle contractions, in heart rate variability, in the inability to breathe deeply, to stay present, to feel safe even when nothing is wrong. This is not psychosomatic. This is biology doing its best to protect you from a threat that no longer exists, but still feels real. And yet, in a world obsessed with appearances and outcomes, few people connect these dots. We treat symptoms, never roots. We self-medicate with scrolling, with wine, with overwork, with detachment. We say we're tired when we're really soul-weary. We say we're fine when we're actually fragmented, and we wear this fragmentation like a badge. We celebrate the hustle. We romanticize emotional numbness as stoicism. We call detachment boundaries. But make no mistake, when your wound remains unacknowledged, it continues to choose for you. It determines the job you stay in out of fear, the partner you tolerate out of abandonment wounds, the opportunities you turn down because success terrifies the part of you still convinced you're not enough. And worst of all, it prevents you from truly knowing yourself, because the real you got buried under layers of adaptation. The unseen consequences don't announce themselves. They whisper through hesitation, through that inner critic that won't shut up, through that inexplicable sadness you feel after joy, through that voice that says, don't get too comfortable, because comfort was never safe. Love was never safe. So your nervous system guards the door, even when no one is knocking. And in this hyper-defensive state, you miss out on life. You survive, but you don't inhabit your days. You exist in a half-present fog, never fully here, never fully gone. You learn to live in exile from yourself, and there's a reason you don't recognize the cost. Because your wound taught you that feeling is dangerous, so you learn to cope by disconnecting from your body, from your needs, from your truth. You became an expert at monitoring others, attuning to what they want, anticipating their reactions, shape-shifting to stay accepted. But that attentiveness came at a cost. You abandoned yourself. You learned that being loved meant being less, that being safe meant being silent. And now, even as an adult, you struggle to say what you feel, to take up space, to believe that your pain matters. So you minimize it, you laugh it off. You compare it to someone else's and tell yourself, it wasn't that bad. But your nervous system doesn't deal in comparison. It deals in imprint. And if your imprint was neglect, chaos, or shame, then no amount of intellectual minimization will erase that. So where does this leave us? At the edge of a terrifying but liberating realization that the life you've built may not be yours. It may be a scaffolding constructed around an unacknowledged pain, and that's okay. You did what you had to do to survive. But now, survival isn't enough. Now, you're being called to something deeper, not more performance, not more productivity, but presence. The presence to feel what you've ignored, to meet the child within you who still waits for comfort, to stop gaslighting yourself in the name of strength. Because true strength isn't in the denial of pain, it's in the courage to face it. The rebellion. How to break free. So what happens when you finally catch a glimpse of the chains you've worn so long you forgot they existed? What happens when the false peace begins to feel like poison and the familiar ache of suppression becomes unbearable? The rebellion begins not with a scream, but with silence, an unsettling, eerie kind of silence. It's the quiet realization that you've never truly heard your own voice. Breaking free doesn't start with heroic action. It begins with a terrifying question. What if everything I believed about myself was wrong? That question strikes like a thunderclap through the carefully constructed world of denial. And for most people, that's where the rebellion ends. It's easier to retreat into the cocoon of narratives than to confront the vast unknown of the self. But for those who dare, truly dare, there's another way. It starts with listening to the wound. Yes, listening. Not fixing, not escaping, not numbing. Listening. Your pain has been speaking to you in dreams, in the relationships that keep collapsing, in the anxiety you call normal, and the anger you've buried under rationalizations. It's in the addictions you dress up as habits. The rebellion is radical because it rejects the ego's demand for constant certainty. It accepts the chaos of healing. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And making the darkness conscious means turning toward the very thing you've spent your life avoiding. When you trace your rage back to the silence you endured as a child, when you follow your anxiety to the moment your needs were dismissed, you begin to see that these emotional eruptions weren't random. They were messages, misunderstood, unwelcomed, silenced, until now. And the moment you stop pathologizing your pain and start translating it, the chains begin to loosen. The rebellion means embracing paradox. You must accept that the part of you most in pain is also the part holding the key to your liberation. Viktor Frankl, a man who survived the unimaginable horrors of concentration camps, wrote that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But to change the self is not to replace it with a better version. It is to strip away every version that was constructed in fear. It's realizing that the perfectionist isn't you. It's the mask you created to be loved. The people pleaser isn't you. It's the armor you wore to avoid rejection. The emotionally distant, hyper-rational version of you? Just a fortress built on the battlefield of early betrayal. Real change begins when you stop trying to upgrade the mask and begin to remove it. But how do you do that? Not through willpower, and certainly not through toxic positivity. The first weapon in your rebellion is awareness, not surface awareness. The deep, burning kind that refuses to look away. Awareness that notices your body tensing every time someone raises their voice. Awareness that sees how you shrink when someone disapproves. Awareness that tracks the story you repeat in your head when you make a mistake. I always mess things up. I'm not good enough. No one will ever stay. This is the battlefield. You don't fight your wounds, you witness them. You feel the sharp edge of old shame without numbing it. You let the tears come when they want to, not when It's convenient. You rage, not to destroy, but to express what was never allowed expression. That's not regression, that's release. From here, you rewrite the story, not by pretending it didn't happen, but by refusing to let it define your future. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." That means you can take the pain, every betrayal, every abandonment, every unspoken ache, and use it as raw material for becoming. Your trauma is not your identity, it's the soil, and what you grow in it is your choice. But here's the catch. The world won't applaud your rebellion. In fact, it might resist you more than ever. Because when you stop performing your old role, caretaker, clown, perfectionist, invisible one, people get uncomfortable. They'll accuse you of changing, of being selfish, dramatic, or difficult. That's how you know you're on the right path. The rebellion shakes the foundation not just of your personal identity, but of your relationships, your habits, your ambitions. You'll begin to question everything. Why you chase success, why you fear rest, why you attract certain people. And each answer will unravel another thread in the tapestry of your false self. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, you become real, not fixed, not flawless, but authentic. And that authenticity becomes a beacon, not just for yourself, but for others. The wounded parts you used to hide become sources of compassion. You begin to see others, truly see them, because you've finally seen yourself. This is not the end of pain, it's the beginning of meaningful suffering, the kind that purifies rather than poisons, the kind that makes room for joy, for connection, for life. True rebellion isn't loud, it's honest. It's waking up every day and choosing to feel, choosing to see, choosing to live from a place that no longer fears the wound but honors it. You don't escape your powers. You integrate it. And in doing so, you dismantle the silent machinery that once controlled you. The final piece of your freedom is within reach. But before we get there, there's one last truth to face. Something deeper, something more radical than rebellion. something that will change everything you thought you knew about your pain, your past, and who you really are. The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. The final truth is this: your wound is not just a scar of survival, it is a portal. A doorway not to who you were before the pain, but to someone altogether different, someone deeper, someone forged in the quiet fire of self-honesty. For most of your life, you believed that healing meant returning to the person you were before the trauma. But that person is gone, and perhaps they were never truly there to begin with. What the wound did, however cruel, however unfair, was reveal the illusion of perfection, the illusion of control, the illusion that you had to be anything other than real to be worthy. When you see your pain not as something to fix, but as something that cracked your shell wide open, you begin to understand something most people never will. The wound wasn't your enemy. It was your invitation. The pain was the call. The suffering was the signal. The numbness, the shame, the rage, these weren't signs that you were broken. They were signs that something buried within you was still alive, something unkillable, something sacred. And it had been waiting, not for rescue, but for you, for your attention, for your willingness to stop running and start listening. There is a kind of peace that comes only after the storm, a peace that isn't the absence of pain, but the presence of self. You are not your past. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become in the presence of those memories. That's the final truth. You were never broken. You were buried. And healing is not about fixing what's wrong. It's about uncovering what was always right. Think about it. The cheese. A part of you that kept going after betrayal, that was strength. The part of you that still longs for connection, even after abandonment, that's your humanity. The part that feels afraid but keeps seeking truth anyway, that's courage. These aren't flaws. These are the truest reflections of who you are. The wound was only ever the container. What it held, your resilience, your depth, your capacity to feel, was the treasure. But the treasure can't be accessed by avoiding the wound. You had to go through it, because that's where your real self was waiting. The version of you that doesn't perform, that doesn't please, that doesn't pretend. The version of you that breathes deeply, cries fully, loves openly, and stands firmly in their truth, even when it shakes. And here's something else the world doesn't tell you. Your healing won't always look like growth. Sometimes it will look like rest, like saying no, like walking away from people who can't meet you where you are. Sometimes healing will look like grief, grieving the time you lost, the love you never received, the parts of yourself you abandoned just to survive. But all of that is sacred. All of it is real. All of it is part of the becoming, the deepest truth, the one that hides beneath all the wounds and shame and fear, is that you are already whole, not perfect, not invulnerable, whole. There is nothing wrong with you. There never was. What's wrong is the world that taught you to amputate parts of yourself in exchange for belonging. What's wrong is the system that told you strength meant silence, that love meant self-erasure, that healing meant forgetting. But you know better now. You've seen the truth. And once you see, you cannot unsee. The rebellion becomes your lifestyle, the truth becomes your compass, and your wound becomes your wisdom. This doesn't make you superior, it makes you responsible for how you carry your pain, how you treat others who are still asleep, how you show up in a world that profits off your denial. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy. You don't need to be healed to be healing. All you need is presence, the courage to be with yourself fully, without judgment, without masks, without escape. Because when you do that, when you sit with yourself in the raw, aching truth of who you are, you discover something breathtaking. You were never the wound. You were always the witness. The part of you that suffered is not the part that observes the suffering. And that witness is calm, compassionate, fierce in its clarity. It is the truest part of you. Some call it soul, some call it spirit, others call it consciousness. Whatever name you give it, it's the part of you that never left. The part that saw everything and still believes in your becoming. That's your anchor, that's your light. And when you live from that place, not from your wound, not from your mask, but from your witnessing self, you become free, truly free. Free to love without losing yourself, free to speak without shame, free to live without apologizing. You no longer seek healing as a destination. You live it as a practice, and your life becomes the proof. So no, you're not crazy for feeling the way you do. You're not weak for breaking down. You're not failing for struggling. You are human, and if you dare to feel it all, to face what others avoid, to embrace what others reject, you become something rare. You become whole. The world may not reward that, but your soul will recognize it, and that's more than enough. The wound you pretended didn't exist, now it's your ally, your guide, your mirror. And in the quiet moments when no one is watching, you'll see it clearly. It was never here to destroy you. It was here to reveal you. Welcome home.